Welcome, dear subscribers and curious listeners of my channel. The revelation of Severus Snape's feelings for Lily Potter became one of the most shocking and touching storylines in the entire Harry Potter saga. What once seemed like cold cruelty turned out to be a mask, hiding pain and love. Today I invite you to take a closer look at the subtleties of this story. We'll explore the details you may have missed, but which forever change how we see Snape. Enjoy the video. Number 1. Lily and Snape were friends until 5th year. Their friendship began long before Hogwarts and lasted until 5th year. Lily and Severus were close despite being sorted into different houses. It was Snape who first told her about the wizarding world, and together they explored its secrets. But Snape's growing interest in the dark arts and his increasing ties with future Death Eaters began to destroy the bond they had. The breaking point came when he called her a mudblood, an insult that erased everything. It's important to note, although James Potter didn't begin courting Lily until 7th year, it was in 5th year that Snape lost her forever. That moment made it clear how firmly Lily rejected everything connected to the Dark Lord, even if it meant cutting off a close friend. Number 2. Severus begged Voldemort to spare Lily, but only her. When Snape realized the information he had passed along would lead to Lily's death, he didn't stay silent. He begged Voldemort to spare her life, but only hers. He didn't plead for Harry or James, knowing full well the Dark Lord wouldn't spare them anyway. And Voldemort, it seems, did listen. He offered Lily a chance to step aside. Her refusal led to her death, but also became a gift for Harry. Her sacrifice triggered ancient magic that protected her son. Thus, even from Snape's selfish plea grew one of the brightest and most powerful protections in the wizarding world. Number 3. Snape never attacked Harry over his mother. Severus never missed a chance to humiliate Harry for his looks, his fame, his resemblance to James. But despite all that, he never said a single bad word about Lily. Not once. That's a subtle but crucial detail. His hatred for James came through in every sarcastic jab. But Lily remained sacred to him. Even when he lashed out at Harry, it was through the lens of his old rivalry with James, never through his image of Lily. Number 4. Lily is part of Snape's worst memory. In Order of the Phoenix, Harry sees one of Snape's memories, and it's labeled as the worst. It shows Snape being publicly humiliated by James and the other marauders. Lily tries to defend him, but even her involvement only adds to the pain. Why? Because she saw him at his lowest. Because, despite standing up for him, she didn't condemn James or cut ties with him. And later, she began dating him. That context makes the word mudblood, spoken by Snape in anger, the final blow. It was the end. And it remained the most painful loss of his life. Number 5. Snape cradling Lily only happens in the film. In Deathly Hallows Part 2, there is a heartbreaking scene. Snape bursts into the Potter's home, finds Lily's body, cradles her in his arms, and silently weeps. It became the ultimate image of his vulnerable human side, but in the books this never happens. In the written version, Snape is never shown in Godric's Hollow after the murders. The scene was invented for the film and works primarily for visual and emotional effect, and yet it shows something that words alone can't, the depth of grief he carried until the end of his life. Number 6. Snape and Lily were masters of potions. At first glance they were opposites, but it was their shared passion for potions that brought them close. Lily was a favourite of Slughorn, and Snape, the half-blood prince, was the creator of many innovative formulas and corrections to standard texts. You can imagine them debating recipes, arguing over doses, experimenting side by side. This wasn't just friendship, it was a partnership between two brilliant minds who inspired one another. Number 7. Snape's Patronus remained forever tied to Lily. It appeared without hesitation, a silver doe, graceful and silent, gliding across the forest floor. When Dumbledore saw Snape cast his Patronus, he froze. After all this time? He asked, disbelief heavy in his voice. Snape didn't flinch. He looked straight ahead and answered with a single word that broke every boundary between past and present. Always. That word, more than any spell, revealed everything. His Patronus was Lily's. It had always been hers. And it never changed. Not after her death. Not after years of silence. Not even as Snape sank deeper into the life of a spy. A Patronus is shaped by what gives a person their greatest happiness. Most people's change over time, but Snape's didn't. It was fixed, unchanged by time or grief. Lily's doe was more than a memory to him. It was a promise, a quiet vow that no matter where he stood, in Dumbledore's office or Voldemort's shadow, his heart remained in one place. The silver light wasn't just magic. It was love, forged in guilt and loyalty, glowing in the dark. Forever. Number 8. Snape never blamed Lily for her choice. He never cursed her name, not once. Though Lily married James Potter, the boy who humiliated him, the boy Snape despised, he never turned that pain against her. In all the years that followed, through war, death, and silence, Severus never spoke of Lily with bitterness. His anger was reserved only for James. In the pensieve, when Harry watches Snape's memories, there's not a flicker of resentment toward her. Only sorrow, only regret. He calls her Lily, softly, as if the name itself hurts, because it does. He could have hated her for choosing someone else, but instead he protected her son. He guarded her memory, he kept her picture, and he let her go, at least on the surface. That quiet, unspoken respect tells everything. Snape's love was not selfish. He never demanded anything from her. He let her live her life, even if it meant breaking his heart. And that, perhaps more than any spell he ever cast, showed the kind of man he might have been, if only she had stayed. Number 9. Severus kept Lily's letter for many years. In Deathly Hallows, Harry enters Snape's old room at 12 Grimmauld Place and finds something no one would expect. Hidden among pages of notes and spells is a torn piece of a letter written by Lily. It's dated and faded, addressed to Sirius, and speaks of Harry's first birthday. But one thing stands out. The bottom half of the page is missing. Snape had ripped it, only to keep the part where Lily signed her name. He kept her words, her handwriting, her voice on paper. Even after all those years, it was still sacred to him. It wasn't just a letter, it was proof that she had lived, smiled, and once spoken of her son with joy. To anyone else, it was a scrap. But to Severus, it was a relic. He kept it hidden, folded carefully, not out of obsession, but grief. In that torn parchment, he preserved the one thing Voldemort hadn't destroyed, her presence, her warmth, and maybe in that signature he found the only comfort the world ever gave him, a trace of her, untouched by time. Number 10. Snape tried to protect Lily from dark magic. He never wanted her to see that part of him. In their early years at Hogwarts, Severus hid the books he read, the company he kept, and the curses he studied. He knew Lily Evans wouldn't understand. She believed in fairness, in light, in doing the right thing, even when it was hard. Snape, born into hardship and silence, longed for power that couldn't be taken from him. But he still tried to keep those shadows away from her. When she questioned his friendships with Mulciber and Avery, he dismissed it. "You're being stupid," he snapped. But it wasn't anger. It was fear. Fear that she would walk away. And she did. Not all at once, but slowly, with a hurt he couldn't repair. By 5th year, it was too late. She had seen enough. She had heard him call her mudblood. She knew he had made his choice. Snape begged her forgiveness afterward. "I didn't mean it," he insisted, but Lily didn't flinch. "You call everyone of my birth mudblood, Severus. Why should I be any different?" That was the moment the line was drawn, not by hatred, but by disappointment. He had tried to protect her from the dark, but in the end it swallowed him and took their friendship with it. Number 11. Snape gave up revenge for Lily's memory. He could have destroyed them. Snape knew curses most wizards feared to name. He had studied magic older than Hogwarts itself, spells that could maim without leaving a mark. And yet even when James Potter tormented him in front of the whole school, Severus never struck back in a way that would cause real, lasting harm. He insulted, he sneered, but he never crossed that invisible line. After Lily's death, he had every reason to burn the world down. Her husband was dead, her son survived, and Snape was left alone with nothing but guilt. And yet, instead of vengeance, he chose servitude. He returned to Dumbledore, not to save his own life, but to protect hers, even after it was too late. When Dumbledore questioned his motives, Snape didn't lie. Her son lives, he has her eyes. If you truly loved Lily Evans, and Snape did, enough to let go of every grudge, every wound, every reason to hate. He became a protector of Harry, not out of love for the boy, but out of love for her. The path of revenge was wide open. Voldemort would have welcomed it. But Snape turned away. Instead of using his magic to kill, he used it to save. His life became a contradiction, hated by the students he guarded, distrusted by the allies he aided, and hunted by the Dark Lord he betrayed. But he endured it all for Lily. He never wrote her name again. He never spoke of her openly, but every step he took in secret was a silent vow. I will not let her death be in vain. It would have been easy to destroy. Instead, Snape built a lie, a cover, a mask. Behind it all was only one truth, that the boy with her eyes would live, no matter what it cost him. Number 12. Snape's final wish was to see Lily's eyes. Blood was pooling fast. His breath came in short, sharp bursts. Nagini's bite had done its work. As Severus Snape lay dying on the floor of the shrieking shack, surrounded by shattered glass and betrayal, he looked at the one boy he had sworn to protect. Take it, he rasped, forcing his memories into Harry's hands. But before the end came, there was one thing he needed more than anything else. Look at me. Not because he needed comfort, not because he feared death. He wanted to see Lily's eyes one last time. Harry Potter didn't understand then, but those green eyes, identical to his mother's, were Snape's final glimpse of the woman he had loved all his life. The same eyes that had once looked at him with kindness under the tree by the riverbank. The eyes that had turned away when he called her something unforgivable. And now, in the flickering half-light, he stared into them again, not filled with hatred or regret, but peace. For a brief second, Severus wasn't the spy, the professor, or the bitter man. He was the boy who had loved Lily Evans. In that moment, all his masks dropped. The walls he'd built over decades, built from sarcasm, cruelty, and silence, crumbled. There was no anger, no vengeance. Just that one request, look at me. His love had never asked anything of him. But now, as life slipped away, he asked for her, for a trace of her in the boy's face, and Harry, unknowingly, gave him that. The books never dwell long on this scene, but J.K. Rowling wrote it with piercing clarity. You have your mother's eyes. A sentence spoken 100 times before now landed with crushing weight. This was Snape's redemption, not a grand speech, not a final battle, just a whisper and a look. It was the end of a story that had begun in childhood and ended in war. He had lived a life of pain, carried secrets that broke him, and died without ever hearing, I forgive you. But he died looking at the only thing that had ever brought him light. And in those green eyes, Lily's eyes, Severus Snape finally found rest. Number 13. Lily saved Snape from complete darkness. He stood at the edge of darkness, cloaked in shadows and secrets when the decision came. Severus Snape, once a lonely boy from Spinner's End, had already dipped his hands deep into the magic that corrupted. He had joined the Death Eaters. He had spoken the word mudblood to the only person who had ever seen good in him. He had chosen the wrong side, But when Lord Voldemort revealed his plan to kill a child, a prophesied child born to James and Lily, Snape broke. He didn't care about the boy, he didn't care about the father, but the mother, he loved her still. He went to Albus Dumbledore, the man he had once scorned, and fell to his knees. "Hide them all, then," he whispered, desperate and broken. "Keep them safe, please." That please was not for Dumbledore, it was for Lily. He didn't ask for forgiveness, he asked for mercy. Dumbledore, with eyes full of quiet judgment, agreed, but only if Snape would help protect the child too. Snape didn't hesitate. Anything. That one word became his binding oath. In that moment, Severus Snape turned away from the Dark Lord, not for honor, not for glory, but because Lily Evans had once believed in him, and he couldn't let her memory drown in blood. When Dumbledore later asked, "You have grown to care for the boy, then?" Snape's voice cut like a blade. For him? He turned, eyes burning, and released the truth Dumbledore had never expected. "Always." That word, cold and aching, echoed through every choice Snape made for the rest of his life. He wore darkness as armor, but it was Lily who had lit the last candle in his soul. Without her memory, he would have vanished into the void, another name on the long list of Voldemort's loyal servants. But he didn't vanish. He lived in torment. He spied. He lied. He risked his life every single day inside Voldemort's own circle. He protected Harry Potter because he was the son of the woman he loved. That love, not spoken, not returned, became his guide. In Deathly Hallows, when Harry peers into the Pensieve and watches Snape hold Lily's lifeless body in the ruins of Godric's Hollow, it is clear. He had nothing left to live for, but he still carried her name like a prayer. Lily Evans saved Severus Snape from the abyss, and even in death, she was the only light he followed. Number 14. Snape called her by name when no one else could. When the world spoke of Lily Evans after her death, it was always in past tense. The mother of Harry Potter, the woman Voldemort killed, a casualty, a symbol, a tragedy. She became a name that lost its edges, rounded off by the reverence of memory and the weight of destiny. Yet Severus Snape did not follow the world's cue. He never needed to remind himself who she had been to someone else. For him, she was never the mother, never the fallen, never the girl who died to save her son. She was Lily, always Lily. And that small choice, one word, uttered softly, almost reverently, was more powerful than all the legends told in hushed voices around the wizarding world. Snape's use of her name was not just habit, it was devotion turned ritual. In a world that had redefined Lily through the lens of her sacrifice, Snape clung to the girl from Spinner's End. He remembered the sharp spark of her curiosity, the stubborn line of her mouth when she argued, the way her hair seemed to trap sunlight in its red strands, as if even nature had decided to conspire with her brilliance. No monument stood in her name, but in Snape's memories, every syllable of Lily was carved with precision and care. It was the only name that didn't hurt when he spoke it, because it hurt too much not to. For those who only knew her as a portrait in Harry's memories, it was easy to forget that Lily had once been a real girl, fallible, fierce, and full of warmth, but Snape never forgot. He had lived those moments when she defended him on the Hogwarts Express, when her hand met his shoulder in Spinner's End and lit a fire of hope in the boy who was already too accustomed to shadows. Her friendship, however brief in the grand arc of time, had become the axis around which his life turned. He betrayed her once and spent the rest of his days trying to build a penance tall enough to reach her. Dumbledore once asked, "After all this time?" And Snape replied, "Always." That single word has been quoted endlessly, embroidered on pillows and inked into skin. But what most fail to grasp is that always wasn't a declaration, it was a confession. An admission that he had never let go, that Lily's name remained engraved upon the core of his being, like a stubborn enchantment that no spell could undo. The name he spoke, wasn't for anyone else's ears. It was for Lily, and for the Severus who had once knelt on his bedroom floor, weeping into old robes because he knew he had ruined everything. Even in his final moments, it was her eyes he looked for. Not because they were famous, not because they belonged to the boy who lived, but because they mirrored hers. "Look at me," he whispered to Harry. And in that fractured second, Snape was not seeing the chosen one. He was seeing the girl who had once laughed beside the river, who had cried when her sister turned away, who had believed that even a boy from the wrong side of town could be good. In Harry's eyes he found the last remaining fragment of the only person who had ever seen him, truly seen him, and not looked away in disgust. The world will remember Snape for his bravery, for his double life, for the mastery of potions and the cold steel of his sarcasm. But those who looked closer, who truly dared to look, would find something gentler beneath the layers of bitterness and regret. They would find that his loyalty was not to causes or ideologies, but to a memory. And memory for Snape had a name: Lily. The other professors at Hogwarts rarely mentioned her. They spoke of James with admiration or resentment, depending on their own memories. They spoke of Harry with concern, pride, or exasperation. But no one spoke of Lily the way Snape did, not with warmth, nor grief, nor reverence. They referred to her as your mother, Mrs. Potter, or Lily Evans, in a detached, factual tone. Only Snape's voice carried the weight of a personal loss that never dulled. Only he could say her name like it was the last flower in a dying season. There was a photograph once, buried in the debris of Snape's private quarters after the Battle of Hogwarts. It wasn't framed, not displayed. It had creases from being folded too many times, its corners worn soft with age. In it, Lily was laughing, caught mid-motion as her hair flew across her face. It had been taken in their second year, long before the storm clouds gathered. It was not magic that preserved the photo, it was grief. And even grief, in his case, had her name carved into it. Snape never expected forgiveness. He never asked for it, not from Harry, not from the world. But in his own way, he gave it, to Lily and to himself. Every time he protected her son, every time he risked exposure and death, he did so with the quiet prayer that somewhere, somehow, Lily might know. His deeds were ugly, complicated, stitched together from desperation and love, but he called her Lily. Not Saint Lily, not Martyr Lily, not even Friend Lily, just Lily, and in doing so he preserved her humanity, her truth. People forget that names hold power. The Dark Lord feared to speak his own. Dumbledore chose his with care, and Snape, for all his brilliance, could wield no spell more potent than a name uttered with love. He had called her Mudblood once, and spent a lifetime trying to erase that stain, not from her memory, but from his own soul. Redemption for him was not loud, it was silent, steady, and spoken in a name. Number 15, Severus hated himself for losing her. There is a peculiar kind of tragedy that does not seek pity, a silent, bitter grief that hides in shadows, never asking to be understood. Such was the grief of Severus Snape, a man whose story was not merely a tale of unrequited love, but a relentless self-punishment for a loss he believed he had caused. From the moment young Severus met Lily Evans on the playground near Spinner's End, something in him was stirred that had never been stirred before. She was bright, fearless, kind. She laughed easily. She saw something in him that no one else had ever noticed, not his parents, not the other children, not even himself. She saw worth. And for a boy who had only ever known shame and bitterness, that simple recognition became a light in his life. At Hogwarts, Lily remained that light. Even as he sank deeper into the allure of the dark arts, even as his friends began to echo the slogans of blood purity, Severus kept Lily close, not just in proximity, but in the deepest chambers of his mind. Yet the closer he held her, the more precarious their connection became. And one day, under the pressure of humiliation, shame, and a need to assert dominance in front of his Slytherin peers, Severus uttered the word that shattered everything. I don't need help from filthy little mudbloods like her." The word rang like a curse through the air, not just because of its hateful nature, but because he knew, even before she turned and fled, that he had severed the one tie that truly anchored him to hope. It would be comforting, perhaps, if Snape had blamed James Potter for the loss. James, the arrogant Gryffindor who bullied him, stole Lily's attention and later became her husband. But Severus never truly held James responsible. He saw himself too clearly for that. The cruelty of others had long ceased to surprise him. What did shock him, and wound him more deeply than he could admit, was that he had become someone Lily could not forgive. He did not wallow publicly. He did not confide in friends. There were none left worth confiding in. Instead, he turned further inward, burrowing into his studies, his spells, his secrets. Yet beneath all of it, one truth festered. He had become the thing he once promised Lily he would never be. A man who hurt her. When Voldemort marked Lily's son for death, Severus begged for her life. Not James's, not Harry's, only hers. It was selfish, yes, but also a desperate final cry from a man who had nothing else. And when she died anyway, shielding her infant son with her body, that cry became a lifelong echo of guilt. Dumbledore saw it. He offered Severus something that no one else ever had, a chance to do penance. "You disgust me," Severus had said of himself when Dumbledore questioned his desire to protect the child. But that disgust became fuel. Every time he looked into Harry's eyes, which mirrored Lily's so precisely, he was reminded of the person he had failed and the person he must now protect. He did not ask for forgiveness from Harry. He did not try to be kind or liked. That wasn't the point. Severus did not believe he deserved redemption. His entire life from that moment onward became one long act of repentance. Not for the world to see, but for Lily. For the girl who once smiled at him on a grassy bank beside a river and believed he was good. He remained at Hogwarts, the only place where she still felt real. The dungeons echoed with her memory. The corridors still whispered with her laughter. The great hall, where she once sat under the emerald banners of Gryffindor, held a sacred silence for him. And so he stayed, year after year, walking through a ghost's home, living in the echo of a future that would never be. His work as a double agent was not glamorous. It was dangerous, thankless, and stained with lies. But each lie told to Voldemort, each message passed to Dumbledore, each potion brewed under torchlight was part of his self-imposed punishment. It was also an offering, a way to honor her memory, even if she would never know it. In The Prince's Tale, we finally see the broken pieces of Severus laid bare. The doe-shaped Patronus, identical to Lily's, was not just a symbol of love. It was the embodiment of his grief, his shame, his eternal tether to the only soul who ever gave him light. When Dumbledore asks, after all this time, and Severus responds, always, it is not a romantic gesture, it is a confession. His every breath had been for her. Not to win her back, not to gain her forgiveness, but to keep her alive in whatever small way he could. There was a coldness in Snape, yes. He was harsh, often cruel, and certainly damaged. But that coldness was a shield and a barrier against a world that had taken everything from him except for one memory. Lily's eyes, Lily's laughter, Lily's rejection, and her death, which he relived every night. He never married, never truly connected with another soul. Even his colleagues at Hogwarts were kept at arm's length. He was not interested in companionship. He had already given the best of himself to someone who could never return it. What remained was not love, but duty, not longing, but atonement. Slughorn once praised Lily for her brilliance in potions, and perhaps that, too, is why Severus gravitated toward the craft. It was quiet, meticulous, exacting. It required patience. It left no room for emotional failure. Brewing potions was a way to feel in control, to feel like he was still creating something of worth, even if he believed he no longer was. Number 16, his secret love, became a shield for Harry. Harry Potter never knew how close he came to death in his first year at Hogwarts, nor did he understand for most of his childhood that someone was guarding him from the shadows, not out of affection for him, but because of a love long lost, unspoken, and unreturned. Severus Snape, the man he believed hated him more than anyone else in the world, was also his most vigilant protector. A paradox in robes and bitterness, Snape's love for Lily Evans, Harry's mother, became the shield that stood between Harry and death again and again. This shield wasn't forged from kindness nor tempered by forgiveness. It was cold, hard, and unrelenting, shaped by grief and sharpened by guilt. When Snape agreed to protect Harry, he did not do it with joy or hope. He did it because the ghost of Lily's laughter haunted him, because the green in Harry's eyes burned like the last echo of a world that could never be restored. He saw her every time he saw the boy, and he hated that memory as much as he loved it. Still he watched over him, in silence. In Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone, Quirrell's attempt to jinx Harry's broom during a Quidditch match was thwarted by a silent counter-curse. Harry never noticed Snape standing across the field, lips moving in protection. "Snape was trying to save me?" he later asked in disbelief. The answer was yes, though Snape would have rather swallowed poison than admit it. That moment, the first of many, revealed how far he would go to guard the son of Lily Potter, even while loathing the boy's resemblance to James. It was Lily's choice to love James that had cracked Snape's world in two. That betrayal, however justifiable, festered within him like a wound that never healed. But when Voldemort targeted the Potters, it was Snape who ran to Dumbledore, begging him to save Lily. "Hide them all, then," Snape had said. "Keep her, them, safe." That slip, that flicker of concern for the others, was a moment of truth. Yet what he wanted was Lily, only her. And when she died, Snape's soul fractured under the weight of that guilt. His vow to protect her son was not made in honor, but in penance. Dumbledore understood the complexity of this vow. He didn't ask Snape to love Harry, he asked him to keep him alive. And Snape agreed, not once, but every day, again and again, as the boy stumbled into danger, pulled by fate and prophecy toward a final confrontation with darkness. "You have kept him alive so that he can die at the right moment?" Dumbledore once asked. "Don't tell me now that you have grown to care for the boy." "Expecto Patronum," Snape answered. A silver doe leapt from his wand, the same form as Lily's. "After all this time, always." That one word, spoken with quiet ferocity, unveiled a truth buried beneath years of hostility. Snape never stopped loving Lily, and it was that love, not affection for Harry, that kept him bound to the boy's safety. Every insult he hurled, every cold glare he gave, masked the vigil of a man who never allowed himself to move on. Snape had lost everything, and the only way he could live with that was to protect the one thing that remained of her. Snape's protection came not only in spellwork, but in manipulation. He blocked Quirrell's curse, but also subtly guided Harry through the complexities of occlumency, though his harshness made the lessons nearly unbearable. In the Order of the Phoenix, his attempts to teach Harry to shield his mind from Voldemort's influence were clumsy, brutal, and wrapped in venom. But they were sincere. He was the only one who could teach him, because he too had learned to live behind locked doors of the mind, hiding his thoughts from a master who trusted no one. In The Half-Blood Prince, Snape took the unbreakable vow to protect Draco Malfoy, and, if necessary, to kill Dumbledore. That act alone placed him at the heart of Voldemort's inner circle, but it also allowed him to remain close to Harry, to shield him from the worst of the coming storm. When he killed Dumbledore, the world believed he had finally chosen the side of darkness. But it was only later, too late, that Harry learned the truth. That Dumbledore had asked for this. That it was all part of a plan to ensure Harry's survival. Every action Snape took was weighted with contradiction. He gave Harry the sword of Gryffindor hidden in the Forest of Dean. He passed intelligence to the Order. He led Death Eaters astray. And when the time came, he left behind memories that unraveled everything Harry thought he knew. "Look at me," Snape whispered as he died. It was the only time he asked for anything from Harry. In those eyes, Lily lived. That was all he wanted at the end, to see her one last time. In the pensieve, Harry saw the truth. A boy with greasy hair and shabby robes sitting beside a red-haired girl by the riverbank. A boy whose heart broke when that same girl called him Snivelous. A boy who made the wrong friends, chose the wrong words, and lost the one person who saw goodness in him. And yet, from that ruin, a vow emerged, unyielding and silent, to protect her child. Even if that child never understood, even if that child never knew. Snape's love for Lily was not romantic in the way children understand love. It was obsessive, flawed, tainted by anger and regret. But it was real. It survived humiliation, rejection, and death. And it was powerful enough to protect a boy he could not bear to look at without pain. "He has her eyes," people always said. For Snape, those eyes were both punishment and purpose. His final act was not one of glory. He died on the floor of the shrieking shack, his blood soaking the floor. His last breath spent on a request no one would understand until later. And when Harry stood before Voldemort in the Forbidden Forest ready to die, it was Snape's story that steadied his heart. That shield, the quiet one forged by love and silence, was still around him. Number 17. Lily was the only bright light in Snape's childhood. Severus Snape's childhood was a palette smeared with the greys and blacks of a life lacking tenderness. The dilapidated house on Spinner's End, shrouded in factory smoke and despair, wasn't a place where laughter echoed. His father, Tobias Snape, was a muggle who loathed magic with a bitter vehemence. He took his frustration out on his wife, Eileen Prince, a witch whose power had diminished into silence, and on their son, who bore the marks of fear long before he wore the black robes of Hogwarts. Severus lived in a house where every slammed door reverberated like thunder, where silence was not peace but tension waiting to erupt. In this bleak terrain, Severus had resigned himself to solitude. And then came Lily Evans. It was a moment that shifted something deep inside him, a memory carved into his mind like a spell that never wore off. She was laughing, standing in the sunlight in a park near their neighborhood. Her hair caught the light like a banner of fire, her eyes bright with the innocent thrill of discovering her own magic. She was trying to make a leaf dance in the air, and it did. Severus had watched from behind a tree, his breath caught in awe. She was magic, not just because of what she could do, but because of who she was. That was the day his world changed. For a boy who had nothing, Lily was everything. She became his first true anchor, someone who didn't flinch at his patched clothes or his awkward silences. When they met properly, he told her what she was, a witch, born of muggles, but powerful. It was the first time he gave someone a gift, not a physical one, but knowledge, identity, belonging. In return, she gave him companionship. They walked together, talked for hours, explored the boundaries of what they could do. For Severus, it was the first time someone looked at him with eyes that didn't measure his worth against anyone else's. Their friendship blossomed with the intensity of springtime. It wasn't just that Lily was kind. She was brilliant. She understood him. When he spoke about potion theory or wand lore, she didn't mock him. She listened, asked questions, and challenged him. He had always been alone, a figure hunched over books in shadows, but now there was light, and it came from her. In one of their earliest interactions, he showed her the trick of slowing down a falling leaf. She squealed with delight. He never forgot that sound. The two of them arrived at Hogwarts together, and although they were sorted into different houses, they remained close. Lily, in Gryffindor, glowed among her peers, beloved by teachers and admired by classmates. Severus, in Slytherin, receded into a world that encouraged ambition and secrecy. But still they found each other between classes, in quiet corners, in the whispers of shared books and dreams. For a time, the separation of houses could not diminish what they had. But the world inside Hogwarts was not isolated from the prejudices that governed the wizarding world outside. Severus, craving power to protect himself from the world's cruelty, gravitated towards students who shared his ambition, but not Lily's compassion. Names like Mulciber and Avery began to appear in his circle. Lily noticed, and she warned him. She asked why he would associate with those who practiced dark magic, those who talked about blood purity with venom. He couldn't give her an answer that satisfied her. Their friendship began to fray. Lily was friends with James Potter, Sirius Black, boys who treated Severus with contempt, and he, cornered and humiliated, lashed out. The moment he called her mudblood in the heat of public humiliation was the instant something vital shattered. "I didn't mean it," he later begged, but the damage had been done. Lily's eyes, usually filled with warmth, turned to steel. "You've chosen your way, I've chosen mine." That line stayed with him. It haunted him even years later. Severus lost more than a friend that day. He lost the only real love he had ever known. Lily wasn't just someone he admired. She was the only person who had ever looked past the darkness and seen the frightened boy inside. Her absence left a void that no potion could fill. And yet, even as their paths diverged, his love never withered. When Lily married James Potter, the boy who had tormented Severus, he didn't stop loving her. On the contrary, it broke something fundamental inside him. The pain twisted into bitterness, and then that bitterness into silence. But still, her name lived inside him like a secret spell, one he never spoke aloud but never let go. When he learned of the prophecy where the one with the power to vanquish the Dark Lord approaches, and realized Lily's child might be the target, he begged Voldemort to spare her. He didn't plead for James or for the baby. He begged for Lily. It was not noble, but it was real. It was the desperate plea of a man who had nothing left to lose except a memory. When Voldemort killed her anyway, something in Severus broke again, this time irreparably. He went to Dumbledore. The man who had once treated him with caution now became his last hope. "Hide them all, then," Snape pleaded. "Keep her, them, safe, please." Dumbledore, seeing the rawness in his soul, didn't mock him. Instead, he gave him purpose: protect the boy, not for glory, but for her. Thus began Severus Snape's transformation. He became a double agent, risking death daily not for a cause, but for love. "You do not seem to value your life very much," Dumbledore once told him. Severus replied, "You disgust me." But he followed through. Every act of courage, every drop of poison he swallowed for the Order, he did in her name. It wasn't redemption. He never asked for forgiveness. It was loyalty in its purest, most painful form. Harry, Lily's son, looked so much like James that it hurt. But his eyes, those green eyes, were hers. Snape couldn't look at him without remembering what he had lost. Yet he protected him, taught him, shielded him even when it went unnoticed. He insulted him, kept him at arm's length, perhaps because getting too close would unravel the wall he had built around his grief. In The Order of the Phoenix, he tells Sirius, "You might have been less arrogant when you were alive, and yet behind every scathing remark, there was still the haunting shadow of Lily's memory, the ghost of a promise unfulfilled." When Dumbledore asked Snape to kill him, to carry the weight of that murder, it was Lily who gave him the strength. "What will you give me in return, Severus?" Dumbledore asked. "Anything," Snape said. That word, in its simplicity, is one of the most heart-wrenching confessions in the series. He meant it. He had already lost everything. He would give his soul if it meant honoring Lily's. The Silver Doe Patronus, his most silent, most poetic confession, was the embodiment of his love. When Dumbledore saw it, he asked, astonished, "After all this time?" Snape's response, always, became a refrain for an entire generation of readers. It was a declaration that needed no further explanation. That one word captured decades of silent suffering, of loyalty beyond death, of love so deep it could no longer be separated from pain. Snape's death was not a glorious one. Voldemort betrayed him for the Elder Wand. As he lay dying, he didn't ask for revenge. He asked Harry to look at him, to see those green eyes, to let him, just once more, glimpse the only light he had ever known. And in those final moments, Severus Snape was not a professor, a spy, or a Death Eater. He was just a boy who had loved a girl who had once made him laugh in the sunlight. The pensive memories that Harry later witnessed revealed the truth. Severus was not the cold-hearted villain he had believed him to be. He had been a boy caught in a storm, holding on to one bright flame in the darkness. And that flame had been Lily. She had been more than his first friend. She had been his conscience. Even when he joined the Death Eaters, her memory remained a check on his worst impulses. Every time he faltered, her face drew him back, not out of guilt, but out of longing. He couldn't undo the past, but he could try to shape the future. In that sense, Lily became his moral compass, one he followed even after she was gone. It is a tragic irony that the very woman who brought so much light into his world never knew the full extent of what she meant to him. She never saw the man he became for her, but her presence shaped him nonetheless. And in shaping him, she altered the course of a war. Severus Snape's story is not one of redemption through victory. It is a story of sacrifice in silence. It's the story of a man who loved once, deeply, and irrevocably, and who let that love guide his every decision afterward. He never received Lily's forgiveness, nor did he forgive himself, but in protecting her son, he honored her. And that, in the end, was enough. Even Voldemort, the most feared wizard in modern history, never understood love, but Severus did. He understood it not as a feeling, but as a duty. He gave everything to it. And that is why, in the ashes of war, when the tales are told of heroes and villains, Severus Snape remains something else entirely. A man with a broken heart who still chose to protect the world from the shadows, all because once a girl named Lily smiled at him. Number 18. Snape was jealous of James even before their romance, before the love, before the betrayal, before the tragic choice that would change the wizarding world forever. There was a boy watching from the shadows, a boy with hollow cheeks and long, greasy hair, who clutched books too tightly and spoke too softly. His name was Severus Snape, and long before Lily Evans ever kissed James Potter, Snape was already nursing the slow, corrosive sting of jealousy. It did not start with love. Love would come later, quiet and desperate, twisting into something darker than affection. It began with admiration, with the sharp, radiant brilliance that Lily carried with her wherever she went. For Severus, Lily was colour in a world that often felt grey. While the other children laughed at his clothes or recoiled from his strange words, Lily listened. She cared. And that care, and that simple human warmth, became the most valuable thing Severus possessed. At first, James Potter was a background noise, a blur of laughter, of broomsticks and pranks and easy smiles. But Severus had always been attuned to threat, and something in him recognized early what others might have missed. James was watching Lily. More than that, James was circling, hunting her attention with the careless confidence of someone used to getting what he wanted. And Lily, who was smart and kind and full of her own fire, didn't yet notice how her laughter grew a little louder around James. But Severus did. Even in their first years at Hogwarts, Snape noticed the moments. In the Great Hall, when James would throw a glance Lily's way after catching the golden snitch. In potions, when he would loudly joke about Slughorn's favourites, his eyes sliding toward Lily, who rolled hers but smiled anyway. It was in those small, maddening moments that Severus began to sense what might be coming, and it terrified him. For a boy like Severus, who lived in poverty and carried bruises both visible and hidden, Lily was more than a friend. She was a reason to endure. Her friendship was the thread connecting him to something hopeful, something better. But with James in the picture, that thread began to fray. Every laugh Lily shared with James, every tolerant eye roll, felt to Severus like a betrayal, a foreshadowing. He couldn't articulate the feeling, not then, but it sat in his gut like a stone. He wasn't good at jokes, he didn't fly well, he didn't have a gang of followers or shiny hair, or a family of famous Gryffindors behind him. He had knowledge, sharp as a blade, and a hunger for power. But even he knew that knowledge didn't win hearts. Not in the halls of Hogwarts, not when James Potter was strutting down them. By 5th year, the tension had grown unbearable. Snape's jealousy became a silent, poisonous fog. His hatred for James swelled with each passing week, but it was more than rivalry. There was a fragility to it, an undercurrent of fear. He was not only afraid of losing Lily, he was afraid he had never really possessed her. Not the way James might. Not the way James could. James Potter, for all his arrogance, had a charm Severus could never replicate. Girls giggled when he passed by, teachers indulged him, and Lily, clever, principled Lily, sometimes smiled at James as though she didn't see the arrogance, or perhaps found it amusing. That was the part that tore Severus apart. Because it meant Lily could change, she could forgive what Severus could not. She could warm to the very thing that had made her frown the year before. There is a moment, captured briefly in Harry Potter and the Order of the Phoenix, that cements the heartbreak. A memory in the pensive, one that Harry falls into without warning. James lording over the school grounds, hexing Severus upside down in front of a crowd, and Lily rushing in, defending Severus, but not without scolding him too. "You're as bad as he is," she says, turning on her friend. And Severus, overwhelmed and humiliated, calls her the word that ends everything: mudblood. But what few consider is what came before that catastrophic moment. Even before Lily and James began to date, even before their 7th year, Severus was already unravelling. He was already bitter, already watching from the corners of rooms, seeing how easily James made her laugh, how effortlessly he stole the very light that had once shone just for Severus. The jealousy was not just about love, it was about identity. Severus had wrapped his sense of self around Lily, the girl who had seen something in him when no one else had. When James began to intrude upon that sacred space, it felt like a personal invasion, a theft, not only of Lily's time or attention, but of the last piece of dignity Severus had. He had no brothers, no wealth, no adoration. The only beautiful thing in his life was Lily, and the thought of her choosing James was unbearable. It wasn't just about losing her. It was about being measured and found lacking, about standing beside James and being seen, truly seen, through Lily's eyes, and knowing he didn't measure up. The irony was that Lily, for all her warmth, couldn't understand the depth of that wound. She saw Severus's growing obsession with the dark arts as a phase, a danger perhaps, but not yet a betrayal. She didn't see how it was driven partly by desperation, a way to become someone powerful enough to keep her, to deserve her. But Severus, surrounded by sneers and shadows in Slytherin, was being pulled into a world where love looked like weakness and loyalty was a tool. He might never have admitted it, but Severus wanted to be the kind of man Lily could rely on. He wanted to protect her, but he had no role models for that, only rage and books and secrets. So he grew harder, more silent, more cruel. And every time he saw Lily laugh with James, the cruelty deepened. Every whisper in the common room about their flirtation, every time someone speculated that Lily might come around to James after all, drove the knife deeper into Severus's chest. By 6th year, it was no longer just jealousy, it was fury. He hated James Potter not only for what he was, but for what Severus could never be. And hatred, in Severus's hands, became a weapon. He dug into dark magic, not only because it promised strength, but because it gave him a way to matter, a way to say, "You cannot take everything from me." And yet James kept winning. He won the attention, the admiration. And eventually, in 7th year, he won Lily. Snape would never recover from that loss. Even years later, after joining Dumbledore's cause and risking his life for Harry, the shadow of that early jealousy never truly faded. It shaped him, made him cold, bitter, impenetrable. It taught him that love does not always save, that sometimes it fails to protect and becomes the thing that ruins you. One might ask, if Severus loved Lily so deeply, why did he call her that name? Why did he hurt her so profoundly? The answer is simple and terrible, because he was already broken, because jealousy had curdled into resentment, and in the moment she stood between him and further humiliation, she became a reminder that he could never be James, and perhaps that she no longer wanted him to be. There is a haunting line from the Deathly Hallows that lingers in readers' minds. Dumbledore, speaking to Snape, says, "After all this time?" And Snape replies, "Always." It is a moment of pure, raw honesty, but it is also a confession of guilt. His love never faded, but it was never free of the poison he let grow inside himself. Snape's story is not a romance, it is a tragedy, a slow unraveling of a boy who loved too possessively, who watched from the sidelines as his worst fear became real. He did not lose Lily when she began dating James. He began losing her years before, the moment he let jealousy eclipse gratitude, the moment he turned his anger on the very person he loved most. And Lily, bright, strong Lily, deserved better than to be a battleground between two boys. Yet, that is what she became. Her friendship with Severus was the last thread connecting him to light. When it broke, everything dark inside him rushed in. Even in adulthood, even as he protected Harry with a fierce and silent devotion, Severus never forgave James, and perhaps never forgave Lily either, for choosing James, for laughing at the boy with the greasy hair, for walking away. But beneath the bitterness, the masks, the long black robes, lived that first feeling. The boy who watched Lily smile across the corridor and felt the stirrings of jealousy. Not because she had fallen in love, but because she might. Because someone else might see what he saw in her, and she might smile back. That was the moment he lost her, not in their 5th year, not when he called her that word, but in those quiet early days when James Potter first made Lily laugh. And Severus, standing alone in a corner of the library, knew he had no laughter to offer. Only silence. Only shadows. Number 19, Severus tried to change himself for Lily. In the shadows of Hogwarts, between dusty corridors and torchlit dungeons, a boy named Severus Snape lived 2 lives. One was filled with secrets and whispered spells. The other was quietly lit by the presence of a girl named Lily Evans. The tragedy of Severus Snape is not merely in his descent into darkness, but in the fragile moments when he reached for light. For her. There was a time when he believed he could be better, if only to match the brightness he saw in Lily. It was a quiet conviction, one that he never dared to name aloud, yet it shaped the course of his youth. From the very beginning, Severus was an outsider. The moment he boarded the Hogwarts Express, his eyes already carried the burden of knowing too much about pain and rejection. In Lily, he saw not just a friend, but a glimpse of something pure, untainted, and entirely different from the life he had known. She was a Muggle-born, yet she shone in his eyes with natural magic, a brilliance that made even the mysteries of the dark arts pale in comparison. He clung to her with quiet desperation, not only out of affection, but because she was, in many ways, his moral anchor. Even as their worlds began to diverge, Severus tried to hold on. The Sorting Hat placed him in Slytherin, while Lily went to Gryffindor. That was the first crack. Still he sought her attention, waited for her in corridors, smiled in rare and awkward attempts to be kind. He did not have the graceful charm of James Potter, nor the warmth of Remus Lupin. What he had, instead, was determination. Severus believed that if he learned enough, if he became powerful enough, she would see him differently. In their third year, the school buzzed with rumors about the growing tension between bloodlines. Slytherins were whispering about purity, and the talk was turning sinister. Severus, always hungry for knowledge, found himself drawn to it, not because he believed in it, but because it gave him a sense of control. Dark magic was alluring to him, not for its cruelty, but for the power it promised over a life that had always rendered him helpless. But even as he delved deeper into forbidden books, he hid them from Lily. He did not want her to see that side. He still hoped he could keep it separate. There was a night in their fourth year when Severus skipped a meeting with Avery and Mulciber, boys who would later become Death Eaters, just to help Lily with a potion she was struggling to brew. He did not boast about it. He pretended to stumble into the classroom by chance. But he had overheard her frustration earlier and memorized the page from their textbook in preparation. That night, as she smiled at him, thanking him softly, he felt like he had done something good, and it terrified him more than any curse. Severus was aware that Lily disliked his friends. She warned him. "They're not good people," she once said with quiet urgency, as though hoping to save him from a fire only she could see. He nodded but said nothing. He told himself he was only pretending to agree with Mulciber's rhetoric, that he would never truly believe what they believed. But each time he walked with them through the dungeons, he felt the weight of her disappointment growing heavier. The worst part of Severus's transformation was how invisible it felt to everyone except Lily. She noticed the hesitation in his voice, the way he stopped using certain words around her. She saw the way he winced when his friends mocked her blood status. Severus thought she would understand that he was trying, that he was not like the others. But change is invisible until it's too late, and pretending not to be like the others was never the same as actually being different. In their fifth year, something shifted irreversibly. It began with a duel, a cruel one, where James Potter humiliated him publicly. Dangling upside down, robes over his head, his underwear exposed to an audience of laughter and jeers, Severus lashed out. And when Lily came to his defense, his shame turned to rage. He wanted to be strong. He wanted to be someone she didn't have to defend. And so in a voice twisted by humiliation, he used that word, mudblood. There is no redemption after a word like that, not when it comes from someone who had once held her friendship like a sacred promise. "I don't need help from filthy little mudbloods like her," he spat, and the world seemed to pause. The silence that followed was more brutal than any hex. Lily didn't slap him, she didn't scream, she simply walked away. And with each step she took, Severus felt a part of himself die. He begged her forgiveness, of course. He waited outside Gryffindor Tower for hours. He sent her notes, spoke in whispers, confessed in half-truths. But Lily was already slipping through his fingers, and the worst part was, he knew it. He knew the moment the word left his mouth that it had killed something he could never revive. He had not only lost her, he had lost the very idea that he could be someone different, someone worthy. "I'm sorry," he said to her days later, voice barely audible in a deserted hallway. She didn't look angry anymore, just tired. "You've chosen your path," she replied, her voice quiet but firm. And she was right. He had chosen. Not with conviction, but by inertia, by not resisting, by standing still while the tide dragged him further into the dark. After that, Severus surrendered. If he could not be the kind of person she believed in, then he would become the kind his house celebrated. He immersed himself in the dark arts, not as a means to an end, but as a refuge from pain. He told himself that strength mattered more than love, that knowledge mattered more than kindness. And yet, late at night, he would sometimes pull out an old letter from Lily, the ink faded, and read her words again and again. She had once called him brilliant. That word echoed louder than any spell he had ever cast. Years passed. The boy became a man, the student became a Death Eater, but there were cracks in the armor. Albus Dumbledore saw them. He asked questions that Severus hated answering. He reminded him of things Severus wanted to forget. "You disgust me," Snape once said to Dumbledore, yet returned the next day for another conversation. Somewhere beneath the bitterness and sarcasm, a part of him still hoped to be better. Then came the prophecy. A child born at the end of July. And when Severus realized it could be Lily's child, her son, he panicked. He begged Voldemort to spare her, humiliated himself before the man he had once revered. He then turned to the only man he had ever despised more than himself, Dumbledore. "Hide them! Hide them all!" he whispered. It was not a strategy, it was a plea, but it was too late. When Lily was killed, Severus collapsed. His wail of grief shook the very walls of the house on Godric's Hollow. In that moment, every lie he had told himself about power, about strength, about inevitability, shattered. He hadn't just lost her, he had destroyed the last fragment of his better self. And so he turned. He became Dumbledore's man, not for politics, not for redemption, but for love. "You do care, then?" Dumbledore asked him once, when Severus agreed to protect Harry. Snape did not speak. Instead, he summoned his Patronus. A silver doe leapt into the air, Lily's doe. She had loved James, but it didn't matter. Snape's love had not faded with her death. It had become the compass by which he would navigate the rest of his life. He watched over Harry from the shadows, taught him, insulted him, protected him, never asking for thanks, never explaining why. He was cruel at times, unbearable at others, but his heart had been broken in ways no one ever saw. "Look at me," he whispered, with dying breath, in the shrieking shack, not out of sentiment, but because Harry's eyes were Lily's. It was his final moment, and he used it to see her one last time. Severus Snape never became the hero Lily might have hoped for. But he tried. In silence, in failure, in sacrifice he tried. And for a man like him, whose life was a constant war between light and shadow, that was the greatest magic he ever performed. Because love had not made him perfect, but it had made him choose, and in choosing, even in pain, he became something more than he had been. He became human. Number 20. Lily's death became a point of no return. Of all the stories whispered through the shadowed corridors of Hogwarts, none is more haunting than that of Severus Snape and Lily Evans. It is not a tale of requited love or redemption in the classic sense. It is a tragedy written in silence, in secrecy, and in the irrevocable consequences of a single, devastating choice. The moment Lily died, something within Snape was extinguished, and nothing, not time, not magic, not repentance, could bring it back. When Severus Snape stumbled into Dumbledore's office with the news of Voldemort's attack on the Potters, he was no longer a Death Eater. He was no longer even a man of ambition or ideology. He was a broken vessel of grief, collapsed beneath the weight of his own guilt. Lily Evans, the one person who had ever seen light in him, was dead. And Snape, in his desperate plea to save her, had ultimately led the Dark Lord to her door. It was not a betrayal in the traditional sense. It was far worse. It was an act of carelessness, rooted in arrogance and blind loyalty to a cause he never truly understood until it was far too late. This moment, Lily's death, was not simply an emotional blow. It was a complete transformation or a point of no return. For the rest of his life, Snape's actions were tethered to that single night in Godric's Hollow. He didn't change sides to become a hero. He didn't do it for glory or vengeance. He did it because he couldn't live with what he had done. And in that his tragedy begins. Dumbledore, the ever-observant manipulator, saw the opportunity in Snape's guilt. He did not comfort him. He did not console. Instead, he gave him a path, a way to atone. And Snape, unable to go back, took it. Snape's promise to protect Harry Potter wasn't born of affection for the boy. On the contrary, he loathed Harry's resemblance to James, but he saw Lily's eyes, and that was enough. Dumbledore knew it. "Look at me," Snape whispered as he died, and the reason was painfully clear. In Harry's green eyes, he saw the last remnant of the only person who ever truly mattered to him. It wasn't Harry he wanted to see, it was her. That longing, quiet and unwavering, had guided him through every bitter choice he made. Every risk Snape took as a double agent was a whisper to Lily's ghost. When he fed Voldemort false information, when he endured the Dark Lord's tortures, when he murdered Dumbledore at the man's own request, each act was a memorial. He lived not for himself, but for her memory. His Patronus, a silver doe identical to Lily's, was the clearest window into his soul. When Dumbledore saw it, he was stunned. "After all this time?" he asked. "Always," Snape replied. That word, always, has become one of the most enduring symbols of devotion in the Harry Potter universe, precisely because it was never returned. His love was never rewarded. That made it pure. Snape was not a man who wanted redemption in the eyes of others. He wanted punishment. He walked through life cloaked in bitterness, not because he was cruel by nature, but because pain was the only emotion he trusted. He cut himself off from kindness, from forgiveness, because he believed he didn't deserve it. His work as a spy for the Order of the Phoenix was not born out of nobility, it was penance. Every secret passed, every risk taken, was an offering on Lily's grave. Even when Snape was promoted to headmaster of Hogwarts, he did not let the power corrupt him. He used it to protect the students from the Carrows, to keep Harry safe, despite the burning hatred between them. He allowed himself to be hated because it was easier that way. Love had already destroyed him once. Admiration held no appeal. The only thing that mattered was the unspoken promise he had made to keep her son alive. Snape's presence in Harry's life was always shadowed by misunderstanding. Harry saw in him the same cruelty his father had suffered. He never saw the layers of torment, the self-sacrifice, the loneliness that Snape carried like a second skin. Yet Snape never tried to correct the boy's assumptions. Perhaps he couldn't. Perhaps he believed he deserved the hate. Perhaps he knew that love once lost cannot be re-earned through explanations or excuses. In the book Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows, when Harry enters the Pensieve and witnesses Snape's memories, the truth finally unfolds. The anguish in Snape's voice when he discovers Lily's death is unbearable. He clutches her lifeless body and sobs, not just for her, but for the entire future he destroyed. It is not the cry of a man who lost a lover. It is the wail of a soul that has lost its very anchor. The most tragic element of Snape's love for Lily is that it never evolved into something new. It remained frozen in time, untouched by age or maturity. In a way, Snape loved memory, an echo. But that echo was louder than the call of power, louder than fear, louder even than death. He was willing to risk everything, every single day, just to keep her memory unstained. And when the final moment came, when Voldemort ordered Nagini to strike, Snape didn't beg for his life. He begged for a glimpse of her eyes one last time. It is telling that Snape's final thoughts were not of triumph, nor regret, nor fear, but of Lily. That is what makes his love enduring. He did not try to erase her from his past. He did not try to replace her. He carried her like a phantom, silently guiding his every move. He didn't seek to be understood. He simply acted, quietly, devastatingly, and always in service to her memory. What separates Snape from other tragic figures is his absolute lack of self-forgiveness. His story is not about redemption, but about unwavering devotion. He was, in the end, a man who became a monument to his own remorse. His decisions from the moment of Lily's death were no longer his own. They were made on behalf of a woman who would never know them. He spent nearly 2 decades risking everything, not for recognition, but for a single moment of peace that never came. Snape's hatred for James Potter stemmed from old schoolyard grudges, yes, but more deeply from jealousy. James had what Snape could never have, Lily's love. Yet Snape never used this bitterness to harm Harry, at least not fatally. He walked a narrow, painful line, protecting the boy he couldn't stand because of the woman he couldn't forget. That contradiction, the simultaneous disdain and devotion, is the essence of Snape. There is a poignant irony in the way Harry ultimately names his son Albus Severus. It is an act of posthumous forgiveness, a recognition of truth that Snape never got to hear. "You were the bravest man I ever knew," Harry says, finally understanding that heroism can be quiet, misunderstood, and dressed in bitterness. Snape never lived to hear those words, but perhaps he didn't need to. Snape was not a traditional hero. He didn't save lives in a blaze of glory. He saved them from the shadows at great personal cost. And he never stopped grieving. Even in his anger, even in his cruelty, that grief colored every word he spoke. He taught potions like a man grasping for control. He enforced rules like someone who needed structure to survive. And behind every sharp word, every cold glare, was a man screaming inside for something he'd already lost. In the wizarding world, where magic can heal wounds and revive the dying, there is no spell that can undo betrayal. No wand can erase regret. Snape understood that better than anyone. His story is not just about love, it is about consequence. It is about what happens when love is taken for granted and when it is lost before it can be redeemed. Snape didn't die a hero. He died alone, unloved, and misunderstood. But he died with his promise intact. That, in the end, is what makes his legacy powerful. Not the things he said, but the things he did. Not the love he received, but the love he gave, unreturned, unrewarded, and unwavering. The death of Lily Evans was the death of Severus Snape's soul. Everything that followed was simply the echo of a man walking through the ruins of his own heart. Number 21. Snape helped Lily in secret, even after their fallout. There is a shadow that lingers in the corridors of Hogwarts, a silent trace of something tender beneath layers of bitterness and regret. It belongs to Severus Snape, the Slytherin student whose name became synonymous with mystery, resentment, and ultimately loyalty. And within that shadow lives the ghost of Lily Evans, the one bright thread woven into the otherwise dark tapestry of his life. Though the world sees a sharp and bitter man, the truth is far more complex, because even after Lily turned her back on him, even after their friendship was irreparably broken during their 5th year, Severus never stopped protecting her. The halls of Hogwarts are filled with whispered rumors. One, scarcely remembered and never proven, speaks of an unseen hand that sabotaged certain Slytherin tricks before they could reach their mark. The pranks were clever, hexes hidden under layers of enchantment. But someone always got there first. Not with a wand raised in open defiance, but with quiet, deliberate magic, performed in solitude and secrecy. It wasn't Dumbledore nor McGonagall, and certainly not James Potter. The timing was too exact, the spells too advanced. Only someone with deep knowledge of the dark arts, someone who had walked beside it and bent it to his will, could have undone those traps before they activated. In their 5th year, when Snape called Lily a mudblood in the heat of humiliation, the break was violent and public. Lily never forgave him, and he never forgave himself. But that's the moment the world stops watching him. The story of their friendship ends there for most. What came after was a private, internal reckoning. A mourning that wore no black robes but burned inside him with every step he took past her in the great hall, with every glance toward the Gryffindor table that she never returned. Yet if anyone had looked closer, they might have noticed something strange. Certain corridors Lily used were strangely clean of enchantments. Tricks meant to humiliate her failed in oddly quiet ways. A disarming curse already cast. A vanishing spell left half-finished. Someone had arrived before the danger could take root. A specific incident whispered about in Ravenclaw dorms involved a potion placed in Lily's goblet during dinner, meant to embarrass, perhaps even harm. It never worked. The potion had been altered. Instead of turning her hair green, it caused the Slytherin who planted it to erupt in boils. Some said it was Peeves, others thought Flitwick had interfered. But Slughorn, who had watched Lily's progress in potions with delight, reportedly narrowed his eyes at Snape that evening, as though he knew. Snape never spoke of it, but the boy who brewed flawless antidotes and had memorized the Hogwarts library of potions by third year had been seen in the kitchens earlier that day. No one asked why. Lily never acknowledged these strange protections, either because she never noticed or because she suspected and didn't want to know. Snape's help was invisible by design. He had always been at his strongest in the shadows, working from behind the veil of silence. He didn't do it to be thanked. He did it because he couldn't bear the idea of her being hurt, not while he still had the power to prevent it. There was another moment, largely forgotten, recorded only in an old Gryffindor journal that passed through dormitories over the years. During a Care of Magical Creatures class near the Forbidden Forest, Lily tripped a curse embedded in the grass, set there by Avery and Mulciber, two of Snape's known associates. It should have triggered a jinx that forced her to speak in backwards riddles for a week. But nothing happened. A second later, Avery was seen swearing under his breath, and Mulciber glanced nervously toward the trees. What no one saw was Snape, several yards away, lowering his wand under his cloak, his lips barely finished whispering the counter-curse. Even after he joined the Death Eaters, Snape's actions betray a conflicted loyalty. His initiation into darkness was not born of hatred toward Lily, but of confusion, ambition, and the twisted appeal of power in a world where he had felt powerless for so long. But the part of him that still loved Lily, that part never died. It only grew quieter, more desperate. When Lily began dating James Potter, Snape said nothing, but his temper grew shorter. He buried himself in his studies, becoming more reclusive, darker, and more dangerous in his magic. But the pattern continued, curses undone before reaching her, hexes misfiring against her direction. After all this time, Dumbledore once asked him decades later, to which Snape answered, always. But that answer wasn't born only in his adulthood. It had been there all along, through silence, through unseen shields, through unspoken warnings slipped into books Lily was known to borrow. Even when he had no right to call himself her friend, he behaved like one. There is a particular quote in the books that glimmers with truth when revisited in this context. "You disgust me," Lily told him the day she walked away. But she also said, "You've chosen your way, I've chosen mine." And yet, despite choosing separate roads, Snape followed hers at a distance, turning away when she looked back, but never leaving entirely. Years later, when Harry arrives at Hogwarts, Snape's bitterness toward him is often interpreted as hatred, but it is more accurate to call it pain. Harry was the living echo of the one person Snape could never forget. Every time he looked at the boy's green eyes, the very same as Lily's, it reminded him of every choice he made that led to losing her. His cruel demeanor was not merely spite, it was armor, protection, because he could not afford to feel, lest it break him. It's no coincidence that Snape's Patronus, when finally revealed, is a doe, the same as Lily's. The magic of a Patronus is deeply personal. It reflects the wizard's innermost self. For his to mirror Lily's is more than a romantic detail. It is a confession carved into the very fibers of his soul. She was the center of his emotional gravity, even in absence, even in death. There's evidence that even during the rise of Voldemort, when Snape was deeply embedded in the Death Eater ranks, he still sought information about Lily's safety. It was through these connections that he overheard the prophecy, something he immediately brought to Voldemort. And yet, in a moment that reveals everything about his inner torment, Snape ran to Dumbledore, begging him to protect Lily, not James, not Harry, just Lily. It was selfish, but it was also raw and real. "I have come to you, to beg you to protect her," Snape said in that cold, candlelit office. And when Dumbledore responded that Lily's safety could not be ensured without protecting the whole family, Snape's silence was telling. His love was still pure, but it had not yet matured into something selfless. That came only later, after her death, when he saw Harry and chose to dedicate the rest of his life to guarding her son. But that mission began long before the war. It began in the corridors of Hogwarts, in silences that meant more than words, in spells cast in secret. The older he became, the more his protection took shape as a vow. Unspoken perhaps, but not unfulfilled. There are professors at Hogwarts who, if pressed, might admit they suspected Snape of guarding someone. Flitwick once hinted at it, telling a seventh year that magic cast in darkness can serve the light, if the heart behind it is true. The tragedy of Snape is that his most noble acts were invisible. He was never the hero who stood in the light. He was the one in the corner of the room, eyes alert, wand ready, erasing hexes before they struck. It's likely Lily never truly knew what he did for her. Or if she did, she chose not to let him know. And that, too, is part of the heartbreak, because true loyalty is not measured by thanks but by persistence. There's an unsent letter among Snape's possessions, preserved in an old drawer in his childhood home, discovered years later by a magical historian researching former professors. In it, Snape wrote, "I know you'll never read this, I know you wouldn't believe me even if you did, but I still walk the corridors you walked, I still listen for your voice in every echo." It was never signed, but the words are unmistakable. Some say Severus Snape died unloved, but that's not true. He was loved once, purely, deeply, and perhaps most painfully, briefly, and that one light, even as it vanished from his life, became the compass by which he lived. He couldn't save Lily, not from fate, not from prophecy, but he saved her from many smaller cruelties, traps, curses, whispers in the dark. And though no one saw, though no one thanked him, he never once stopped. If Hogwarts itself could speak, its walls would tell of a boy who stood quietly by, mending what others broke. It would whisper the name of Severus Snape, not in anger, but in reverence. Because long before the world called him a traitor, a spy, or a savior, he was simply a friend who didn't stop being one, even when it cost him everything. Number 22, Lily was the last person who saw good in Snape. Of all the relationships that shaped the legacy of Severus Snape, none cast a longer, more heart-wrenching shadow than his bond with Lily Evans. She was the thread of light in his otherwise shadowy world, the sole person who ever truly believed he could be good. This wasn't naive affection or fleeting admiration. It was a steadfast, almost defiant belief in his humanity. Lily saw through the bitterness that clung to Snape like a second skin. Even as he gravitated toward darker paths, she tried to hold on, to remind him of the boy she once knew. Not with anger, but with quiet sorrow and desperate hope. That hope would be the last spark of goodness he ever truly felt directed toward him. Lily Evans knew Severus Snape before the name Snape carried dread, before it summoned images of a hook-nosed potions master brooding in the dungeons. When she met him on Spinner's End, he was just Severus, thin, pale, gifted, lonely. He was different from the other boys, and she recognized something fragile beneath his sharpness. In their early friendship, she laughed at his wit and marveled at his knowledge. He taught her about the magical world before Hogwarts ever did. But more than that, Lily offered him kindness without condition. Her warmth made him believe, however briefly, that he belonged somewhere. Throughout their school years, the strain of Snape's growing involvement with the darker elements of Slytherin House began to pull at their friendship. And yet Lily didn't turn away. When others whispered about the company Snape kept, Avery, Mulciber, Rosier, she approached him not with condemnation, but concern. She warned him, she questioned his choices, but what she never did was give up on him. Even in their final real conversation, when Severus was already knee-deep in the ideology of blood purity, she pleaded rather than scolded. "You're calling people mudbloods now. What's wrong with you?" It wasn't said in hatred, but heartbreak. That moment, frozen in memory, encapsulates Lily's singular place in Snape's life. No one else at Hogwarts would have looked at him then and still seen the boy who shared secrets under summer skies, but she did. She reminded him that he was brilliant, that he could choose better. And when he let that moment slip through his fingers, when he lashed out with a word he could never take back, he destroyed not just their friendship, but the only bridge left to his better self. It wasn't just that Lily stopped speaking to him. It was that with her silence came the silence of hope. The pain that followed was not immediate acceptance of loss, but an agonizing internal battle. Snape begged for her forgiveness. He approached her after the incident, not out of entitlement, but despair. He tried to explain, to undo what couldn't be undone. But Lily had reached the end. It wasn't the slur alone, it was the cumulative weight of everything he had become. She couldn't keep believing in someone who refused to believe in himself. Still, there is no indication that she hated him. Her heart simply broke too many times. When Lily walked away, no one else filled that void. No one ever called him Sev again. That nickname, light and affectionate, was a remnant of innocence. Even Dumbledore, who trusted Snape to an extraordinary degree, never looked at him with the kind of personal belief Lily once did. Albus trusted his abilities, his loyalty, but not his soul, not the way Lily had. McGonagall treated him with wary professionalism. His fellow Death Eaters saw him as a useful asset, not a friend. The students feared him. The world saw either a villain or a double agent, but Lily had seen a person. And perhaps the most tragic element is that Snape knew this. He carried the weight of her faith like a wound that never stopped bleeding. Everything he did afterward was touched by her absence. His service to Dumbledore, his protection of Harry, his willingness to live a double life steeped in risk, it wasn't born from heroism, but penance. He wasn't trying to save the world. He was trying to be the man Lily had once believed he could be. "You disgust me," Sirius once said to him. "Haven't you ever loved anyone?" The truth was he had, but it was a love wrapped in loss and shame. The memory that broke Snape was not Lily's death, but her final judgment. When she turned her back on him, she didn't slam the door. She just stopped hoping. And that quiet surrender was worse than hatred. In The Prince's Tale, Harry relives a cascade of memories that shows Snape's unraveling. Among them is a scene where Snape, distraught and desperate, asks Dumbledore to protect Lily. "Hide them all, then," Snape says. "Keep them safe, please." But even then his plea is for her, not James, not Harry, just Lily, because without her he was already lost. After her death, Snape didn't recover. He calcified. He wrapped himself in sarcasm and cruelty like armor. He punished Gryffindors, sneered at joy, and kept to the shadows. But beneath that exterior was a man grieving the only person who ever truly loved him, not romantically, but humanly. Snape's every step thereafter was shaped by that grief. His Patronus, a silver doe, mirrored Lily's. His reaction when Dumbledore asks, "After all this time?" and he replies, "Always," isn't sentimental. It's devastating. That one word contains a lifetime of guilt, devotion, and pain. Even his disdain for Harry was not simple hatred. He saw too much of James in the boy's face, but it was Lily's eyes that undid him. Those eyes haunted him because they reminded him of the life that could have been. Not with Lily as his wife, perhaps, but as a friend, a believer. Someone who still called him Sev. He watched over Harry not out of affection, but out of a promise, a debt. Every insult hurled at the boy, every detention, was balanced by silent protection. He kept Harry alive, but never allowed himself to be close. He didn't think he deserved to be. Snape's relationship with the dark arts only darkened after Lily's death. Though he continued to serve Dumbledore, he still surrounded himself with darkness. His appearance grew harsher, his tone more cynical. There's a quiet tragedy in the fact that he used the very same curses he once sought to learn with fascination. The difference was they no longer brought power, they brought survival. He became a man who walked alone, shunned by both sides, because the one person who bridged those two worlds for him, Lily, was gone. In the end, Snape's death is almost poetic. He dies not in battle, but cornered, vulnerable, betrayed by the man he helped rise. Voldemort sees him as a tool, nothing more. He orders Nagini to strike, and Snape bleeds out on the floor, clutching the one thing he has left, a memory. Not of glory or revenge, but of Lily. He gives Harry his thoughts, his truth, in hopes that it might finally mean something, that someone, even if not Lily, might understand what he lost. He doesn't ask for forgiveness, he doesn't expect redemption, only memory. The fact that no one else ever saw goodness in Snape speaks volumes about how the world fails people. Hogwarts was full of heroes and mentors, but no one reached into the darkness the way Lily did, not because she was blind to his faults, but because she loved despite them. She saw his worth when others only saw potential danger, and when she left, she took with her the only proof that such worth existed. Snape could not fill that void with power, nor with logic, not even with vengeance, because what he truly missed was not her love, but her faith. There is something deeply human in Snape's spiral. He doesn't become a villain because he is evil. He becomes one because he is unloved. And the irony is painful. The man who once sought greatness to impress a girl ends up hiding greatness as an apology to her memory. In his final act, Snape becomes the quietest hero in the war against Voldemort, not for fame or admiration, but because somewhere deep inside, Lily's voice still whispered to him, still believed, had Lily lived, could she have saved him? That question is both unfair and inescapable. Perhaps not. But her death sealed more than her fate. It extinguished Snape's moral compass. The moment she was gone, he no longer had a reason to try, not for himself, only for her son, only for always. And that's the bitter edge of it. Snape didn't die a happy man, he died a haunted one. But even in death, his actions echoed the voice that once called him Sev, the voice that refused to see him as a monster. J.K. Rowling never romanticized Snape. She gave him layers, ugly, bitter, and wounded. But in showing how Lily was the last to believe in his goodness, she revealed the root of his tragedy. Because sometimes all it takes is one person, one believer, and when that person disappears, the world becomes unbearable. Lily was the mirror in which Snape saw the best version of himself. When she shattered, so did he, and he never stopped trying to gather the pieces. Number 23, Severus wanted to be part of her world but remained outside. Of all the relationships in the Harry Potter series, few are as tragic, complex, and quietly heartbreaking as that of Severus Snape and Lily Evans. It was not a love story in the traditional sense, not a tale of mutual affection or happy endings. Instead, it was a story of longing and quiet exclusion, of a boy who dreamed of belonging to a world that was never his, and of a girl who became the symbol of everything he wanted but could never truly reach. From the very beginning, Severus stood at the threshold of Lily's light, never quite stepping into it, always casting a shadow from the edge. The first image we ever see of them together, Snape watching Lily playing with her magic by the riverbank, is not one of joy but of yearning. He is hidden behind the bushes, observing her from a distance, his heart already caught in the orbit of someone whose world felt like a fairy tale compared to his grim, neglected reality. Spinner's End was a place of peeling wallpaper and silence punctuated by shouting. The Evans household, by contrast, seemed filled with warmth and light. Lily's laughter echoed in a way Snape had never known within his own home. And that's where the root of it all lies. Severus didn't just love Lily, he loved the world she represented, colourful, open, filled with trust and connection. Even before Hogwarts, Lily belonged to people in ways Severus never could. She walked into friendships with ease, carried herself with a natural confidence, and possessed a spark that drew others in. Severus, meanwhile, was always the outsider, already marked by poverty, awkwardness, and an aura of bitterness that clung to him like smoke. His connection with Lily was something sacred, perhaps the only softness in his life. But from the start he knew the fragility of it. He was a boy of shadows, chasing a girl made of light. When they arrived at Hogwarts, that fragile bond faced a reality too big for either of them to control. Lily was sorted into Gryffindor, surrounded by warm, loud, noble peers who saw the world in black and white. Severus was sent to Slytherin, a house that spoke to his desire for power and protection, but which pulled him away from her more with each passing year. The same corridors they walked together as children soon became battlegrounds for opposing values. Lily tried to hold on, tried to remind him of who he was, but Severus was changing, or perhaps more painfully, he was becoming more of what the world had already decided he was. He was drawn to the darker students in Slytherin, like Mulciber and Avery, who offered him belonging, respect, even fear. But in doing so, he made compromises that chipped away at the person Lily once knew. She saw it, and it hurt her. The distance between them wasn't just physical anymore, it was emotional, ideological, moral. As Lily grew into someone brave and warm-hearted, Severus leaned into bitterness and defense. He wasn't just outside her world now, he was beginning to stand in opposition to it. The heartbreaking culmination of their divide came in their 5th year, in the infamous scene where Severus, humiliated and angry, calls her a mudblood. This wasn't just a slur, it was a confirmation of every fear Lily had about the person he was becoming. In that single moment, he took the knife of the world's judgment and twisted it into the one person who had ever seen him as more. And though he begged her forgiveness, something irreparable had broken. As Rowling writes, "You've chosen your way, I've chosen mine." That was not cruelty, it was exhaustion. It was the final sigh of someone who had tried to pull a friend from drowning, only to be dragged under themselves. What makes this relationship so devastating isn't just that it ended, it's that it never had a real chance. Severus was never fully in her world. Even when they were closest, there were walls he couldn't tear down. His suspicion, his fear, his hunger to prove himself to people who mocked Lily's very bloodline. Every step closer to Slytherin's approval was a step away from her. He wanted so badly to matter, to be more than the poor boy from Spinner's End. And yet, the more he tried to rise, the more he sacrificed the very thing that had made him human. Despite everything, his love for her never died. If anything, it fossilized, preserved under layers of guilt and secrecy. His Patronus, though, just like Lily's, is the most powerful symbol of that devotion. When Dumbledore sees it and asks, "After all this time?" Snape's answer, always, became iconic for a reason. It wasn't romantic, it was tragic. It was the answer of a man who lived his entire life standing at the edge of something he could never enter. Even in death, Lily's memory shaped his actions. He turned spy for the Order, risked his life every day, not out of ideology or courage, but for her son, for her. His protection of Harry was a paradox, a living reminder of the man who had taken Lily from him, but also the last fragile thread that connected him to her. Snape's feelings for Harry were never warm, but they were deep. He defended the boy fiercely because in Harry's eyes he sometimes saw her. And when Harry looked back with Lily's eyes, it was both punishment and reward. Snape's isolation wasn't just circumstantial, it was spiritual. He didn't just live alone, he felt alone, even in crowds. Even among Death Eaters he never fully belonged. Even among the Order he was always distrusted. Lily had once given him a bridge into a better world, but his own wounds and choices had burned it. He was left to wander both sides, never truly at home on either. And perhaps the most agonizing part is that he knew it. He knew he had destroyed the one thing that ever loved him without condition. There is a moment in The Pensive when Harry watches the younger Severus watch Lily. She's laughing, sunlight on her hair, vibrant and alive. And he is hunched over, silent, with the same haunted look that would never leave him. The visual contrast says everything. She was a part of life. He was a ghost of it. Lily represented the warmth of the wizarding world at its best: family, friendship, loyalty. Severus, for all his brilliance and power, could never find his way fully into that space. Their tragedy lies in asymmetry. Lily was Severus's entire world. Severus was only a chapter in hers. She mourned him as a friend, grieved the boy she once knew. He carried her in his heart until his dying breath. That kind of imbalance doesn't make her cruel. It makes the situation unbearable. Snape was always asking the same question in different forms: "Can I be good enough to stand beside you?" And life answered him with silence. Even his last act, delivering his memories to Harry, was not for himself. It was for Lily. He wanted her son to know the truth, not the full truth, not the ugly parts, but the part that mattered. That once, long ago, Severus Snape had loved someone so much that he gave up everything to protect what she left behind. It was a final offering, not of redemption, but of honesty. A confession at the end of a life spent pretending not to feel. Snape never truly belonged anywhere, and that is what makes his story the most human. In a world divided by houses, blood status, and loyalty, he was always in between, half-blood, double agent, broken-hearted. He loved someone who belonged to a better world and spent the rest of his life guarding the door to it, even though he was never invited in. Lily's story went on. She married James, had Harry, became a symbol of resistance and maternal sacrifice. Severus's story, by contrast, stood still. He never loved again. He never escaped the shadow of what happened on that summer day in their 5th year. It defined him. Not because she rejected him, but because he rejected himself. That's the cruelest twist. She saw the good in him before he could. Throughout the books we see Snape through a fog of bitterness, cruelty, and sarcasm. But beneath it all, there is always that wounded boy who never quite made it out of the bushes, who still watched the world through Lily's reflection, trying to imagine himself inside it. His life was a canvas painted with brilliant strokes of ambition and brilliance, but the background was always her. In the end, the tragedy of Severus Snape is not that he loved and lost. It's that he never truly got to love freely at all. He stood at the threshold, hand outstretched, the door forever ajar but never open, and Lily, bright, bold, beloved, was always on the other side, smiling in a world that was never his to touch. Number 24. Harry became the final reminder of Lily. In the dim corridors of Hogwarts, where secrets linger like cobwebs between stone columns, one man walked with a heart heavy with shadows and memories. Severus Snape, feared, despised, misunderstood, carried within him the last flicker of a love that had once burned brighter than any spell. That love, Lily Evans, was long gone, but her eyes remained, and they looked back at him every day through the boy he claimed to hate. Harry Potter, the child of destiny, was to Snape the last living reminder of the only person he had ever truly loved. Snape never denied his bitterness. His disdain for Harry was public, etched into every point he deducted from Gryffindor, in every sneer he reserved for the boy's every misstep. He saw James Potter in Harry's untamed hair, in his reckless bravado, in his maddening defiance. James, the boy who had tormented him at school, who had won Lily's heart, who had stood where Snape had once hoped to be. Snape could not look at Harry and not see James, except when he looked into his eyes. Then the world shifted. Those green eyes, Lily's eyes, were more than a physical trait. They were the soul of a woman who had once defended Snape against humiliation, who had spoken to him in gentle tones when others laughed, who had shared childhood dreams and secrets with him before their paths tragically diverged. Harry may have been James's son in blood, but in those moments when Snape met his gaze, it wasn't James who stared back. It was Lily, and that changed everything. The contradiction tore at him. Snape was a man who had lived most of his life behind walls, emotional and literal, walls fortified with sarcasm, coldness, and bitter silence. But Harry was the crack in that wall, a walking paradox, a painful echo. Snape had joined Voldemort to win power, to impress, perhaps even to protect Lily in some twisted way. But when the Dark Lord murdered her, Snape's allegiance shattered. In that moment, something in him died, and something else was born, a silent vow. To protect the boy who bore Lily's eyes, no matter what it cost. Albus Dumbledore had understood this. He had seen past the snide remarks and punishing detentions. In Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows, Dumbledore speaks of Snape's role as protector, and when questioned, Snape responds with a single, shattering word. Always. It is that word that defines Snape, not as a villain, not as a hero, but as a man bound by love long after that love ceased to exist in the world of the living. In his private chambers, Snape would retreat into silence. There he did not wear the scowl of a strict professor. He didn't need to. There, memories of Lily haunted him freely. The way she laughed in the sunlight by the lake, the way she bit her lip when she was nervous, the way she once said his name, not with contempt, but with concern. Every time Harry walked into his classroom, those memories surged forward like a storm. And yet, Snape never turned away. He watched, he scolded, he protected. When Harry broke the rules, Snape saw James. When Harry answered back, Snape heard James's voice. But when Harry was quiet, when he simply looked at him, Snape saw Lily. That was when the anger faded into something else, pain, regret, a longing so deep it made his next breath feel like a betrayal. That was the moment when Snape chose not to punish, chose not to destroy. There was one moment in Harry's third year when he lay unconscious after the Dementors attacked during a Quidditch match. Snape, acting quickly, saved Harry's life, shielding him until help arrived. No one asked why. No one saw the trembling in Snape's hands afterward. But it wasn't duty that had moved him. It was Lily. For how could he let the last spark of her soul die on the same grounds where they had once shared childhood laughter? It's easy to say that Snape hated Harry. He said it often enough himself. But hate is not what stayed his hand when he could have let Harry fall. It wasn't hate that brought Snape to Dumbledore's side, that made him agree to spy, to lie, to walk among Death Eaters as a traitor. It wasn't hate that made him watch over Harry for years, risking everything. It was love, twisted, grief-stricken, stubborn love. And it had a face, and that face had green eyes. In his memories, captured in the pensive and shown to Harry in the final hours, Snape's true story unfolds. We see the boy he once was, isolated and misunderstood. We see the moment he called Lily Mudblood and the pain in her face. We see how he regretted it instantly, how that single word became a wound that never healed. And we see the man who, in death, wanted only one thing, for Lily's son to know the truth. When Voldemort's snake struck Snape, when blood poured from his throat and death loomed close, he did not beg for help. He did not curse his fate. Instead, he looked into Harry's face and gasped one desperate request. "Look at me!" It was not Harry he wanted to see in that moment. It was Lily, for in death he wanted the comfort of those eyes, her eyes, one last time. That was the tragedy and the triumph of his story. Snape had every reason to abandon Harry. He could have sabotaged him, exposed him, allowed him to fall into Voldemort's hands. But he never did. Even when Harry mistrusted him, accused him, despised him, Snape remained. He delivered the sword of Gryffindor when it was needed. He passed on critical memories. He stood between the boy and the darkness, time and again, not for fame, not for redemption, but because those green eyes anchored him to something real, something good, something worth dying for. The war was a blur of loss and noise, but in the silence that followed, when the truth of Snape's role came to light, everything changed. Harry named one of his children Albus Severus, saying, "You were named for 2 headmasters of Hogwarts. One of them was a Slytherin, and he was the bravest man I ever knew." It was a moment that closed a circle, a moment that proved that even if Snape never received love from Harry, he had earned his understanding, and that might have meant more. Snape's hatred was a mask, his cruelty a shield, But behind it stood a man who had lost everything, yet still chose to protect what little remained of the person he had loved. He never forgave himself for Lily's death, but through Harry he found a way to serve her memory, to keep that love alive not in words, but in acts of courage and sacrifice. There is a haunting beauty in the idea that someone can love so deeply, so irrevocably, that even in bitterness they find the strength to do good. Snape did not believe in fate. He did not believe in prophecy, but he believed in Lily. And so he protected the boy with her eyes, no matter how much it hurt, no matter how much he hated the reflection of James, because beyond that hatred was something far more powerful. Snape was not a hero in shining armor. He was not kind, he was not gentle, but he was loyal to the memory of love. And that loyalty shaped the course of a war, shielded a boy, and gave the world a story that will never be forgotten. He didn't fight for glory. He fought for a single truth, that Lily Evans had mattered, that she had changed him, that in her son's eyes she still lived. Perhaps it is fitting that the last thing Snape saw was not a wand or a foe, but a pair of green eyes. The same eyes that had once looked at him with kindness, that had once made him believe in something pure. He had spent a lifetime regretting one word, but in that final moment he found peace, not in forgiveness, but in remembrance. For to be remembered by the eyes of the one you loved, that is a kind of immortality. And so Harry became more than a student to Snape. He became a vessel, a reminder, a lifeline to a world that had been lost. Snape didn't need Harry's affection. He didn't need his gratitude. He needed only to know that Lily had not disappeared completely, that a trace of her still walked the earth, that somewhere, someone with her eyes still fought for what was right. This was the paradox of Snape's life, to protect the boy he hated because of the woman he loved, to live each day with a heart torn in two, to die with that heart still beating for someone already long gone. And yet in doing so, he became something he never thought possible. A guardian, a martyr, a man who, in the face of endless pain, still chose love. It wasn't perfect, it wasn't pretty, but it was real. And in the world of magic, where illusions are plenty and truth is rare, that is the kind of legacy that lasts. Not in stone statues or school portraits, but in the quiet recognition that sometimes the greatest love is the one that endures in silence, the one that is never returned, the one that lives on in the eyes of a child. Number 25. Snape knew everything about Lily, even after her death. There was a time, long after Lily Evans had died, when the world had mostly forgotten her warmth. Her laughter no longer echoed through Hogwarts halls. Her charm, once enough to silence a crowded Gryffindor common room, had faded into the realm of memories too distant to reach. But Severus Snape had not forgotten. For him, Lily was not a shadow. She was a presence, persistent, elusive, and agonizingly vivid. Even after death, Lily remained real to him in ways that defied reason. Severus did not simply remember her, he preserved her. And what's more disturbing, or perhaps tragic, is that he kept discovering new pieces of her life. He collected them obsessively, like a scholar piecing together a sacred text. She was no longer just the girl who defended him at the Hogwarts lake, nor the young woman who married someone else. She became a symbol, a relic, a shrine built inside the mind of a broken man. When Harry first learns of Snape's true loyalties in The Prince's Tale, he is shown not just a man who loved his mother, but a man who never stopped loving her. What the memories do not always tell us, however, is just how deep that devotion ran. Snape didn't merely grieve her, he studied her, not to possess her, not to revive her, but to keep her from slipping away into the irretrievable mists of the past. After her death, Snape reportedly spoke to Minerva McGonagall, not about the Order nor the Dark Lord, but about Lily. He wanted to know if McGonagall remembered what books Lily borrowed from the library during her 6th year. When pressed for a reason, he claimed it had to do with understanding her choices. But it wasn't politics he was trying to decipher. It was Lily's heart. What made her laugh? What authors stirred her imagination? What sentences had she underlined with a quill and a quiet smile? In the Hogwarts archives, buried deep beneath layers of dust and bureaucratic indifference, were logbooks listing student checkouts from the library. Severus Snape read those logs. He traced her fingers in absentia by tracing the titles she once selected: Great Wizarding Discoveries of the 20th Century, Advanced Potion Making, A Study of Charms and Their Limitations, and, quite romantically, Spindlethorne's Autumn Sonnets. None of these facts were necessary for his work as a professor, nor as a spy. They served no tactical purpose, but they were vital to his survival, like air to lungs collapsing under the weight of grief. Years later, Snape knew how Lily had referred to her son in private. Not just Harry. She had once jokingly called him my little stag, a play on James's animagus form, though she said it with warmth, not mockery. Snape only learned this from an old conversation with Bathilda Bagshot, whom he'd met in Godric's Hollow under an alias. Bathilda had heard it from Lily herself in one of their casual chats over tea. Snape had asked her what Lily's house looked like inside, not because he wanted to know how James lived, but because he wanted to reconstruct the world Lily built for herself. He wanted to know how she arranged her books, what kind of curtains she picked, how she preferred her tea. These were the tiny brushstrokes in the great painting of her life. Dumbledore, in his quiet way, knew of Snape's obsession. "You have a curious kind of love, Severus," he once told him. "It clings like ivy, even when the stone has crumbled." But Snape made no apologies. He could not help himself. For him, the war was not just a fight against Voldemort. It was a battle to protect the last traces of Lily's essence, even if that essence existed only in the details no one else cared to remember. Once, while escorting a student to the hospital wing, Snape paused in front of the trophy case near the Great Hall. His eyes did not linger on the Quidditch plaques, nor the headboy medallions. He stared for a long time at the faded certificate that named Lily Evans as a recipient of the Special Award for Services to the School given in her 7th year. No one knew exactly what the award was for, though some speculated it was for her role in brewing a healing potion that saved a poisoned student. Snape knew. He had written a letter to Slughorn after the war, under the pretext of an academic inquiry, just to confirm it. The most unsettling discovery came years later, when a stack of confiscated student letters was unearthed from a dusty drawer in the caretaker's office. Filch had kept them, unopened, for years. Among them was a folded note in Lily's handwriting addressed to M. It had never been delivered, and while no one could say who M was, Snape was certain it referred to Mary MacDonald. The note described a dream Lily had bolted of being chased by a faceless figure through the forbidden forest, only to be saved by someone with black eyes and a silver doe. Snape found this letter through quiet persuasion and a discreet use of legilimency on an unsuspecting third-year court wandering the halls after curfew. He kept the letter. He memorized every word. Snape even tried to learn more about Lily's Muggle childhood. He travelled once, silently, invisibly, to Cokeworth, not just to revisit the place where they first met, but to observe Petunia from a distance. On one such trip, he broke into the old Evans house when it stood empty, unlocked and decaying. He found old photographs, some of which showed Lily as a toddler holding a small stuffed rabbit. He took nothing, but he stood there in the dust and silence for what seemed like hours. He would not admit it, but he knew more about Lily's favourite things than her own son. He knew she used cinnamon in her pumpkin pasties, not nutmeg. He knew she hated the taste of licorice wands, despite pretending to enjoy them around James. He knew she once tried to grow a patch of magical violets in her backyard. They wilted in the Muggle soil, but she was proud of the attempt. She had written about it in a letter to Marlene McKinnon, which Snape had later read in the wreckage of a burned-out cottage hidden beneath a broken floorboard. All these details came together to form the mosaic of a woman who no longer existed. But to Snape, she was still alive, not in body, not even in spirit, but in the recollections he gathered like raindrops in a cracked cup. He feared, more than death itself, that she might be forgotten. Forgotten by her son, by her friends, by the school. Forgotten by the world. And so he made it his mission to remember for everyone. He never spoke of these memories, not even to Dumbledore, but sometimes when patrolling the corridors late at night he would pause by the stained glass windows, casting his shadow over the colours of history. And in those moments he would silently recite lines from the books Lily once loved. He did not cry. Severus Snape did not cry. But his silence was louder than weeping. There was one night, during the height of the Second Wizarding War, when Snape stood before the Mirror of Erised. Dumbledore had moved it to a forgotten chamber. Snape, whether by accident or instinct, found it. And when he looked inside, he did not see power, nor glory, nor even forgiveness. He saw Lily, smiling, breathing, reaching out. Her hand in his, her eyes forgiving, not judging. He stared at it until dawn. Then he turned, said nothing, and vanished into the darkness. Later, after Snape's death, Harry would wonder how much this man truly knew, how much he had kept inside. It wasn't until he opened a hidden drawer in Dumbledore's study, filled with parchment notes in Snape's handwriting, listing books, letters, quotes, and objects related to Lily, that the magnitude of Snape's silent devotion became clear. He hadn't just loved her. He had catalogued her. The final memory Harry saw in the pensive, the one that broke him, was not just the image of Snape holding Lily's dead body. It was the whisper he gave as he looked at her. "You see, I never stopped." He was not referring to his love. He was referring to his pursuit, the relentless excavation of every trace she left behind. In the end, Lily was to Snape what the sacred is to a monk, unreachable, untouchable, but worthy of endless reverence. He feared forgetting her, not just because he loved her, but because he believed that in remembering her, he preserved the only light that ever existed in him. And so, while others moved on, healed and rebuilt, Snape remained behind. In the shadows of memory, the echoes of laughter, the corners of books once held by hands now gone. A man who knew everything about a woman long dead. A man who gave his life not just for her son, but for the story she never got to finish. It is easy to say Snape loved Lily, but it is far more haunting and far more true to say he remembered her.